Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're tackling the rule book for judicial excellence here in South Africa. We're looking at the structure that ensures the people holding, well, the ultimate power in our courts stay sharp, modern, and really aligned with our constitutional values. Okay, let's unpack this a bit. We're diving into the South African Judicial Education Institute Act 14 of 2008. That's the SAJEI Act. Our mission today isn't just to read the law, but to sort of figure out the thinking behind it, the architectural genius maybe. Because at its heart, this act tries to solve a huge puzzle for any democracy, right?
Absolutely.
How do you make sure judges are completely independent, free from political sway, but at the same time make sure they're constantly learning, accountable, and actively driving that transformation society needs? The real balancing act.
It is, and what's striking is how deliberate the setup was. The act was assented to back in late 2008, started officially January 2009, but it's definitely a living thing. We're looking at the consolidated version now, and it includes important updates, amendments like those from 2015. It shows they're constantly refining how South Africa trains its judges.
So to really get it, we have to start with the why.
Mm-hmm.
And the preamble lays that out pretty powerfully. This isn't just, professional development points. It recognizes training is vital for all judges aspiring new experience.
Mm.
But what specific problems in the South African context does this act aim to fix that, say, a standard law degree just doesn't cover?
Right. Well, connecting it to the bigger picture, the act has this sort of dual necessity. First, the law itself is moving so fast. You've got globalization, technology, completely new social issues.
Yeah.
Judging is just way more complex now than even, say, 20 years ago.
Mm.
And second, and this is really key, the act specifically mandates education and training as tools. Tools for better service delivery, yes, but explicitly for the rapid transformation of the judiciary.
Transformation. That term carries a lot of weight here.
It does. When the Act talks about transformation, it's very clearly about moving beyond the inherited legacy, the apartheid and colonial legal system, and fully embracing the new constitutional dispensation. The idea is, without structured, required education, the judicial system just can't change fast enough to meet those constitutional promises.
So that need for change, that structural need, means continuous learning isn't just nice to have, it's fundamental.
Exactly.
And that brings us right back to that tension you mentioned earlier, judicial independence versus accountability. The preamble seems very clear that education is needed for both. It supports independence, giving judges the knowledge and confidence, presumably, but also helps accountability, making sure they stick to modern constitutional principles.
Precisely. And that constitutional commitment, it's baked right into Section 2, the objects of the Act. The SAJEI exists fundamentally to promote constitutional values.
Right.
How? By enhancing judicial accountability and transformation. The training they provide has to be proper, appropriate, and specifically transformational. And it has to acknowledge both that inherited legacy and the new constitutional framework. It's a blueprint for institutional change, really, not just a few workshops.
Okay, this is where it gets really interesting for me. We've got the massive why. But turning ideals like transformation into reality needs power, structure. How did the legislature actually design this institute, the SAJEI, to carry such a huge dual mandate? What is it structurally?
So the South African Judicial Education Institute, SAJEI, it's set up as a juristic person.
Okay, hold on, juristic person. For listeners maybe not deep in legal terms, what does that mean in practice for SAJEI?
It basically means the institute acts like its own legal entity. It's separate from the government, separate from individuals. It can own property, make contracts, and importantly, it can be sued or sue someone itself. That independence, especially from the Department of Justice, is really vital for it to manage judicial training impartially.
Right, so it has its own standing.
Yes. And its purpose, laid out in Section 5, is broad. Establish, develop, maintain, and provide judicial education and professional training. Covers the whole spectrum.
So their scope sounds enormous. It's covering the whole life cycle of a judge, essentially?
Pretty much. There's a specific focus on entry-level education for aspiring judicial officers, to make them more suitable for appointment in the first place. But the Institute's goals go much wider. Improve the quality and efficiency of justice services overall, promote independence, impartiality, dignity, accessibility, effectiveness across all courts, and something often overlooked. It also has a function to help out foreign judicial institutions and courts, if the council agrees. That sort of cements South Africa's role as a leader in judicial reform, even internationally.
Wow, that is a huge mandate. Before we get to who runs it, there's a little detail in the transitional provisions, Section
Mm.
19, that kind of highlights how complex this all was to set up. The act started in 2009, right?
Yes, January 2009.
But the Institute was only deemed to have actually started its training functions much later, January 1st, 2012. That's like 3 years of groundwork just to get the engine running, just to deliver that first curriculum.
It really does show the huge logistical lift involved in creating an entirely new body meant to govern and transform how the entire judiciary gets educated. Which brings us neatly to governance, that's handled by the council. And the preamble itself stressed that this education should primarily be directed and controlled by the judiciary.
Okay, but wait. If the big goals are accountability and transformation, why let the judiciary mainly control its own training? Isn't there a risk of, conflict of interest or just things staying the same? Institutional inertia.
That's the structural compromise, isn't it? To protect independence, the judiciary needs control over the content. But to ensure accountability and push transformation, the council's composition has to be incredibly broad and diverse. If you look at Section 7 outlining who's on the council, it's clearly designed to dilute any concentration of power, say, just from the high courts, and it mandates outside perspectives.
Okay, let's list some of these members, because this feels like one of the most unique parts of the whole act.
It really is. So it's chaired by the Chief Justice. The Deputy Chief Justice is the deputy chair. That sets the judicial leadership right at the top. But then immediately you see this push for diversity. You've got judges from the Concourt, the Supreme Court of Appeal, judges president, but also 5 magistrates designated by the Magistrates Commission. That ensures the lower courts have a strong voice, and there are specific requirements there about gender representation, too.
So it's definitely not just the top judges calling all the shots. Who else gets brought in to sort of broaden the perspective?
Well, you get crucial outside views needed for transformation. There's an advocate, an attorney, and 2 university law teachers designated by the Law Deans Association.
Right.
But here's where the external accountability piece really lands. 2 members who are not involved in the administration of justice at all. They're designated by the minister.
And then the one that always jumps out at me, the inclusion of a traditional leader. Why mandate a traditional leader designated by the National House of Traditional Leaders to sit on the governing body of a constitutional education institute? That seems quite specific.
That inclusion is, I think, a really powerful statement. It's both symbolic and practical. It's a nod to the need to integrate all sources of law and justice into how judges think. South Africa operates under legal pluralism, right? Customary law exists alongside common and constitutional law.
Right.
So by having a traditional leader on the council, it forces consideration of how traditional authority and customary law intersect with constitutional principles when they're designing the curriculum. This is fundamental if you're serious about transforming that inherited legacy.
That makes the requirement for due consideration of demographic and gender representativity, also in Section 7, feel much deeper than just ticking boxes. It's about making sure all these different facets of South African society are actually feeding into how justice is taught and ultimately administered.
Exactly. And to manage this huge scope, the council has to set up standing committees. They handle specific areas: curriculum planning, overseeing the education itself, budget, personnel, general admin. These committees ensure every part of the Institute's mandate gets systematic attention.
Okay, so we've got the purpose, we've got the people on the council. How does it actually run day to day? How is it funded? And how does the admin side work while keeping that financial independence we talk about?
Right. The key operational person is the director. They're the administrative head, the CEO, appointed by the council. They manage the Institute's activities day to day. And there's a key accountability check here. The director has to provide quarterly management reports to the Secretary General of the Office of the Chief Justice. So there's regular operational oversight separate from the big annual review.
And the money. You mentioned independence is crucial. You can't really be independent if the government can just pull your funding whenever it wants.
This is where the structural safeguards are quite clever. The Institute's spending comes from money appropriated by Parliament, like many state entities. But here's the crucial part. Those funds are earmarked. Or maybe a simpler way to put it is they're ring-fenced.
Ring-fenced, okay.
Yeah. They sit within the budget vote of the Office of the Chief Justice, but the department can't just decide to use that money for something else unless they've consulted the council and National Treasury approves it.
Oh, okay. So Parliament allocates the money, but the Act builds this protective wall around it, stopping it from being easily diverted for other government priorities. That sounds like a serious layer of financial autonomy built right in.
It is. It's a safeguard designed to protect the Institute's ability to pursue its transformation agenda without, facing political pressure through budget cuts. And for oversight on the spending side, the Secretary General acts as the accounting officer. Think of them as the chief financial watchdog for the Institute, making sure every rand is accounted for according to government rules. And all the records, audited every year by the Auditor General.
And that whole cycle of accountability leads back to Parliament, right?
Yeah.
Which ultimately connects the Institute back to the public.
Exactly. The Council has to submit a detailed annual report to the Minister. This isn't just a glossy brochure. It includes the audited financials, the Auditor General's report on those financials, and importantly, a statement on progress. How well are they actually achieving the objects set out in the Act? The Minister then has to table that report in Parliament. So the performance of judicial education becomes a matter of public record, open to scrutiny.
Right.
And just for clarity, the minister here means the cabinet member responsible for administering justice. Though it's worth noting, as things evolve, administrative responsibilities can sometimes shift. For instance, there was a recent update noting that certain administrative powers and functions got transferred to the Minister of Land Reform and Rural Development in October 2024. The Act structure stays, but the specific reporting line within the executive can adjust over time.
So wrapping this up, what does it all mean? This deep dive really shows that this SAJEI Act is much more than just a law about training courses. It creates this powerful entity rooted in the Constitution designed to ensure judicial quality. And it does it through this clever structure that balances two critical things. Independence, managed by the judiciary itself through that diverse council, but paired with really strict public accountability through the ring-fenced funding, the Auditor General, and those reports to Parliament.
I think the core lesson here is that judicial education in South Africa isn't seen as some optional extra or just a nice to have. It's viewed as a critical, absolutely essential tool for constitutional compliance and for driving institutional change. And because it's so essential, it requires its own dedicated governance structure, not just a branch of government, but an independent juristic body with its own specific legal rules for funding and oversight. It's quite unique.
Okay, so as you, our listener, think about this really unique mechanism designed for judicial transformation, here's something to mull over. Given the Act's strong commitment to transformation, to addressing that inherited legacy, and especially that very specific requirement to include a traditional leader on the governing council, what kind of unique, perhaps uniquely South African, constitutionally informed training curriculum might the SAJEI develop that you wouldn't find anywhere else in the world? What real effect could that specific, inclusive composition have on how South African jurisprudence actually evolves moving forward?